Straight up. Welcome to your Way Happy Bible Study. I'm Lisa Dennis Sparks, and you're watching Christians United Broadcasting Network. CUBN, where we want to see you be encouraged in Jesus' name. Glory to the King. Welcome back to your Way Happy Bible Study on CUBN. We were talking when we went to the break about how we are incapable of original thought according to the Word. And I know that's an astounding statement, but follow me on this for just a moment. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. Let's read it one more time. The thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. That means we are incapable of original thought. If there is nothing new, if we are incapable of original thought, then there's nothing new. Remember that our brains are biological computers. There's nothing in them except what is programmed into them. Okay? Just like Bill Gates coming up with Microsoft with software, Steve Jobs coming up with the hardware and software for his own computer system. These things have been here before. So where did they get the idea for these things if they're not new? These things were fed to them. The word says, woe unto, it says that these things must come, but woe unto he who through whom they come. If you're greedy and you're focused on money and being rich and all this, you are vulnerable to demonic impression, where they will give you the information for you to manifest it. But it's been here before. Your biological computer is completely empty until it is programmed. And it is programmed according to the world we are living in. Now, but when you get the word in here, it's an upgrade. Okay? You think higher like God does. I mean, we aren't capable of understanding on his level, but he does elevate your ability to think. You don't think so primitively anymore. You think on a higher level when you have the upgrade of the word in your brain. So what this is saying is that every thought we have is given to us. It's programmed. Because if we were capable of original thought, there would be new things, wouldn't there? But this scripture says there is nothing new under the sun. That everything that's here has been here before. Technology, been here before. Cell phones, computers, space program, collider, electrical grid. All of it has been here before. There is nothing new. Nothing new. There is no new thing under the sun. So everything that we have in our world today has been here before, because in previous times when these things were here, God fed those thoughts and those inventions to those who then invented the things. He fed the knowledge of the technology to them, and it was developed. Then again, in our generation, it's fed. The same things, same thoughts are fed to us. And then they come up with these things that have already been here because those thoughts are fed to us. Now, keep in mind, we are extremely limited in this world we are in. We're limited to 10% of our brain capacity. Because if we had access to 100% of our brain capacity, we would destroy the world immediately. Okay, we have to be limited to 10% just to preserve the world long enough for God's plan to play out. Okay, so that's an interesting concept, though, isn't it? Have you considered before that we are incapable of original thought? These scriptures indicate that that is exactly the case. If we were capable of original thought, then there would be new things under the sun, things that have never been here before. But according to these scriptures, that is not the case. In verse 10, is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before us. So when was technology here before? It was here before the flood. They were doing genetic experimentation, just like they're doing now. They had all the same technology we have now in Noah's time. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days when the Son of Man comes. Okay? Back then, they were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were giving in marriage. They were living lives just like we are in Noah's time. And the world was wiped out, and then technology was gone again. But then it only took 400 years. See, from Adam and Eve to the flood was about 1,500 years. That's how long it took for technology to develop initially in Noah's time, is when it was wiped out. Then after the flood, it only took 400 years for technology to come back. At the Tower of Babel, Nimrod's arrows he was shooting into heaven, those are missiles, space program, that kind of thing. They were setting up internet. They were shooting arrows into space, which is missiles, satellites, that kind of thing. Technology was back only 400 years after the flood. And that's when the Lord came down. He said, let's go down and confound their languages. And he dispersed the people. He confounded their languages. And then he dispersed them according to those languages into the far reaches of the one continent world of that time, Pangaea. And then when they were dispersed, he separated the continents. He separated the people because, as it tells us in Genesis, I believe it is 11:6. Let's see here. Ooh, my pages are getting all leakage. Genesis. I believe it's 11:6. Oh, my pages are... My poor Bible. It goes through a lot. Now, in Genesis 11:6, it says, this is the Tower of Babel. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, because the people were all of one language after the flood. And it says, and the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do. See, technology came back quickly. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. When the people are all together, all the languages understand All the people understand each other's languages and they collaborate together. Nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. They stopped building the Tower of Babel, which interestingly looks exactly like the Parliament building for the UN. It's really, they designed it according to what they believed the Tower of Babel looked like. It's like the Tower of Babel all over again. Therefore, the name of it called Babel. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. So it took 1,500 years from Adam and Eve to Noah. And you had technology in Noah's time. And it was wiped out. Then only 400 years after that, it was back again, because the people were all one and they all understood each other and their languages. And he confounded their languages and dispersed them, and then he divided the continents in the time of Peleg. Let me give you the scripture on that. Go over here to my concordance. I'm going to look up Peleg because I know that he's the one. I remember studying this. Okay. In Chronicles 1:9, and unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of the one was Peleg, because in his days the earth was divided. That's when the continents were divided. And his brother's name was Joktan. So, and I did an outline in my studies where I wrote down all of them, how old they were, how long they were here, and I was able to determine that it was around 400 years between the flood of Noah and the days of Peleg, when the continents were divided. So see, it wasn't very long after the flood when technology was back in the days of Nimrod, and the people were corrupted again. So then after the people were dispersed at Babel, there has been no more technology arriving on the scene until our generation. So since about the year, 1500, 1900, about 1900 years after Adam and Eve, you had the continents divided. And then you had Abraham at around 2000, 100 years later, at around the year 2000 from Adam and Eve. Then you had 2000 years later, you had Christ. And then 2000 years later, here we are. Okay. So technology has been here before. And we know that from the scriptures in Ecclesiastes. It's really interesting, isn't it? I've looked into these things. I just find all this fascinating, really. I mean, does anybody have any questions? I'll look over here and see if anybody has any questions. Okay, let me look. Okay. I have to click on here to be able to see. Hi, Shanna. Glad to see you, sis. Hi, Wendy. Glory to God. Okay. You know, I really love it when I see you guys loving one another in the chat room and caring about each other and saying hello to to one another. I think that's awesome. And I think it's pleasing to the Lord to see the children of God loving one another. They will know we are Christians by our love. That's what the song says. Okay, and then I'll run over here to to YouTube. Thought I had it up, but I don't see it. Now, let me let you guys on Facebook know that if you do, if Facebook does take us down at any point, YouTube is still up, okay? Our YouTube channel is Believers Central 1. So you can always go over there and see the broadcast, even if Facebook ditches us. And they have been known to kind of do that. Hi, Paw Socks Mom. Welcome. She says, I just felt led to come here. You know, that's how we don't advertise the show. Everybody who comes here is led by God to do so. And that's how we like it. We're not going to put our own human effort into leading people here because we want God to lead people here. That's his job. And he does. He leads people. He leads people to be here. We're very happy to have you here, Paw Socks Mom. Welcome. Let's see. Oh, Janine, you're so sweet. I love you. You're so precious. She's saying God has led you here just as he led all of us. That's right. Everyone. Did you know I very rarely send a friend request. Only if I know somebody personally or I went to school with them or something like that. I just accept all the ones that come in. And there's a waiting list on both walls, and I apologize for that. So if I haven't accepted your friend request yet, it's because there's not a spot open, but I try to keep those, you know, as people leave and get mad at what I have to say, then I add more people onto the list who are waiting. So, hi, Cherry to Faith. God bless you. Okay. Are you ready to get into the book of Exodus? We had our little sidebar there. Let's get into Exodus. Now, we're going to start at Exodus chapter 1 and verse. Let's go ahead and just start at verse 1 again, so we have this entire study in one segment here where we start. Okay, Exodus, the second book of the Bible in the Old Testament. We're going to do chapter 1, verse 1, and start here. Now, these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt. Every man in his household came with Jacob, and we reviewed and talked about how we learned in Genesis when we did the study there about how Joseph was sold into Egypt. He became the governor of all Egypt eventually and saved the people, saved the nation, because he was able to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh and knew that there was a famine coming, a terrible famine. And so his brothers were forced to come and buy food in Egypt, and he revealed himself to them, and they were reconciled. And then Joseph had his father Jacob sent for him and for all of his family. There were like 70 of them, and brought them into Egypt where he could make sure they were fed and cared for during the famine. Now, these are the names of Jacob's sons. Verse 2, Reuben, Simeon, Levi or Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin. Dan. Now see, at this point, Dan is one of the tribes. He's later disinherited. But at this time, He's one of Jacob's sons, okay? Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls. For Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied, and waxed exceeding mighty. And the land was filled with them. They multiplied. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph, a new Pharaoh, who didn't know Joseph and didn't have the respect for Joseph and his relatives that the Pharaoh who gave Joseph the governorship had. So in verse 9, and he said unto his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Imagine how much they had to be fruitful and multiply for them to be mightier than the people of Egypt. In verse 10, come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. They became slaves. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramesses. In verse 12, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. They were afraid. In verse 13, and the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick and in all manner of service in the field. All their service, wherein they made them serve, was with rigor. It was miserable for them. They were under the taskmaster's whip. In verse 15, and the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of the one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them. They refused to kill the baby boys, but saved the men children alive. In verse 18, and the king of Egypt called for the midwives, and said unto them, why have ye done this thing, and have saved the men children alive? Which, ignoring the orders of the Pharaoh. In verse 19, and the midwives said unto Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. So the midwives are saying, well, they're having the babies before we can even get there. They're so strong that they have these babies themselves before we can ever get there. In verse 20, therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. In verse 21, and it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. He's willing to let the women live, but he wants the men killed among their newborns. Let's go straight into chapter 2. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. So they a lot of times they would marry within their own tribe. in verse 2, and the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. Now notice, this is Moses. He is born of the house of Levi, which is the priesthood. Okay, so Moses is descended from the priestly line. Let me see, is Troy trying to take us to a break? I think he is. When we come back, we're going to start again in Exodus chapter 2 and verse 3. Don't go away. Straight up.